What are your marketable skills? I promise this is a relevant question to the video. I'm specifically defining marketable as something that would look attractive to people or corporations seeking to employ said skills for their personal use. The employer in this example would be us. The players and the employee would be the weapons in Team Fortress 2 relevant to this video. Consider the stock flamethrower. Its stats are so well understood it hardly needs any introduction. Fire damage, afterburn, air blast are all well-documented gameplay mechanics that insist upon themselves. Its marketable skills would include reflecting a wide range of projectiles, spy checking through afterburn, and being an effective close-range weapon, amongst other things. However, in the interest of game balance, it was designed imperfectly. It's non-effective for long-range combat scenarios and completely useless underwater. The flamethrower is not a perfect weapon, but its marketable skills greatly counterbalance its flaws and rank it as a weapon well suited for an employer's use. The same would equally apply to each other weapon in the game, not just the stock weapons. Flare gun covers the pyro's generally weak, long-range abilities by providing a projectile, while tricky to aim relies on an employer's skill rather than a direct fault of the weapon. Successful hits with all three of the flare guns result in fire damage plus afterburn, plus an additional mini crit or 4 critical hit upon hitting a burning player. Pyro, especially as a class, is incredibly visually conductive, which means his weapons give an enormous amount of feedback for employers to know how much damage is being inflicted, and for how long. You can see and hear afterburn damage, you feel flares hitting their targets. Pyro is a skill-expressive class in this way, much to contrast against the long-dead fable of WM1ing, where Pyro would just randomly click left on their mouse and just run forward. On the exact opposite end of the spectrum, we all have the low-skill conductive weapons with little feedback and a small pool of marketability. The Neon Annihilator is a melee weapon which relies on infamously spotty and sometimes unreliable melee hit registration systems, and its only benefits are incredibly piddling. Not always being able to count on hit registration makes it visually and audibly inconsistent, a trait shared by every other melee weapon in the game, but to much more dire effect considering its combat-oriented nature. Pyro's melee slot is largely reserved for extra utility because he's already got a close-range weapon in large print on his resume from the start, that being his primary weapons. The Neon Annihilator can crit wet players, but making players wet is something Pyro is only capable of doing if they airblast an enemy into water, which is not frequently used in map design. It can't even pair with the Gas Passer, which is another low skill-based weapon. Also, it can remove sappers in 2 hits for some reason. The home record does this in 1, I don't know why this is an additional stat, to be honest. I hope I've established some set of soft guidelines for what makes an employable weapon and an unemployable weapon. Weapons with clearly designated intents with the right amount of visual and auditory feedback are counted as employable, when weapons with an inconsistent or vague intents with a higher degree of inconsistency are anywhere amongst a spectrum of being unemployed. Following the logic I've just laid out, where would Pyro's arsenal rank amongst a gradient? The most employable weapon, I would say, is likely the stock flare gun, the degreaser, and stock flamethrower. Perfectly reliable and infinitely useful for nearly every situation with excellent employer feedback. Gas Passer and Hot Hand rank on the other end, of having ill-defined use and suffering from visual, auditory, or mechanical flaws that severely hinder whatever effectiveness it could have. So, what's in the middle? At least the bottom of the barrel for Pyro's arsenal occupies some space, even if it's not very desired space. The Hot Hand has a spot as a joke weapon at the very end, but being in the middle puts you something recognized not for being awful or useless, so what are you? Having a weird potential grab bag of useful and useless abilities all at once puts you in the precarious situation. You are a unique shape that simply can't be defined by a binary on the gradient. Being noticed is the last thing in stock for these weapons. Your greatest achievement is just being acknowledged. Being adrift in this kind of limbo state is not something I would wish on any weapon, but being in a limbo state like this is just so lonely. And loneliness has followed you your whole life. On the control point, in spawn, in the battlements, there's no escape. You're God's lonely merc. You are the Manmelter.
Surprise! Burn in hell, you mumbling abomination!
My preparation for this video shouldn't be understated. I am approaching this production with a far bigger mindset than the scope of the last one, and probably larger than any other after it. So in preparation, I have played, recorded, and studied dozens of hours of Team Fortress 2 only as the Pyro class equipped with the Manmelter. I have spent an astronomical amount of time researching, analyzing, and considering the wiki and other sources in my odyssey to understand this gadget inside and out. In my determination, I haven't spoken to anyone outside of it when it was absolutely necessary. Only when I'm working my miserable day job is when I've had to open my mouth to communicate with anyone. I haven't told you any of this to pity this situation, but rather to enhance the mindset one needs to complete such a Sisyphean journey. This weapon is more than a set of textures and stats. It's a mindset, a way of life, and something to undertake with great caution. This is the Manmelter. I've given this one a name so we can attach ourselves to it. Everyone, I would like you to meet Ralph.
Yo, look, 5-1!
Let's start off small. I'd like to explain the stats and application of the weapon one by one as we go through each line. So we're looking at the stats of the weapon, we... Oh no, look at all that blue text! It's okay. We can do this. The weapon stats listed in the description are as follows. You get an increase in projectile speed by 50%. By projectile speed, the description is referring to every other flare weapon in the game, so the detonator, scorch shot, and stock flare gun, which have comparable arcs and firing speeds to each other. The Manmelter isn't like those other girls, though. By comparison, the Manmelter's fiery bolts zip right past the flares with shocking speed. This immediately sounds like a net positive, a faster-moving projectile that's much harder to identify to boot, that seems almost guaranteed to hit its target, but this is a twofold problem. For starters, it presents a harsher learning curve in order to hit your shots. This isn't entirely a fault of the weapon's design, but rather a feature that one has to navigate in order to properly use it. Going back to the employable examples from a few moments ago, each other flare gun all have nearly identical firing speeds to each other, which settles the player into a much more comfortable set of reactions and expectations. An employer has a far greater chance of picking up and switching flare guns at a moment's notice in the loadout without having to alter his playstyle too radically, while achieving high levels of play with each secondary weapon. The Manmelter's awkward projectile doesn't follow this, which forces you to adapt your reaction speeds and tracking in order to land any hits. I can't count how many shots I've whiffed and missed just because I was expecting a detonator flare to shoot out instead. But why is that? I've just explained that I've spent well over a dozen hours with this weapon in preparation for the video, but how come I can't hit my shots? Am I just plain bad at the game? Well, maybe, but I do have an excuse. Compare what models each flare gun uses. The flare guns, as you'd expect, use flares. Shocking. Distinct, visually impactful models that your eye can track when you launch and see when your target is hit and set on fire. The Manmelter fires a wispy, pinprick-sized comet that streaks in an upward arc that just evaporates into thin air once it hits them. The lack of concrete visual feedback is a dreadful flaw in the weapon's design because it makes it exponentially more difficult to properly aim and try and find out where your shots would go, because you're not 100% on where it's going when you fire, or how the projectile will react when you potentially hit something else. Let's talk about that arc, shall we? The flare gun's arc feel much more impactful because we can see the flares soaring through the air. Hitting something creates a pathway in our brains that teaches us to keep hitting it again in order to achieve the same outcome. Hitting more targets with flares more often means that you hit targets more often. It's pretty simple. This is how practice with TF2 weapons in a boiled down experience work. With the Manmelter, you kinda just have to guess. You can see the flares shoot out of it, sorta. This poor feedback distracts you from being able to keep hitting your targets, which dramatically slows down, if not stops, the entire process of becoming more accurate. Clicking on your mouse to even launch the fireball just feels like you're spawning it out of nowhere and just hoping to God that it connects with something. That arc is really something frustrating. It makes it so difficult to point and shoot, you almost have to aim at the floor just to hit anyone. Unless you're point blank, if you are, why you're not using your flamethrower, you aren't hitting one just by pointing at it and then shooting it. Dr. Gordbort insists that learning the golden ratio in order to hit a measly 30 damage flare shot is critical. 30 damage!
Oh, it's such a brave statement! Such a brave stance you took, Aiden!
It inflicts full afterburn on every class except Pyro, but that's it. It doesn't stack with any crits, no mini crits, not even knockback. It just inflicts fire, which does 30 damage, and that's all she wrote. So in order to kill any class at all, you need to aim at least 2 bolts at them and then slowly wait for afterburn to chip away at them. Need I remind you that the flare gun's second hit is a guaranteed critical hit that does 90 damage that will demolish light classes instantly and deal massive, nearly fatal damage to everyone except heavy in seconds. So the projectile is hard to aim, does substantially less damage, and is much harder to practice with almost no reward. I'm being completely serious when I say this weapon functions exactly the same as the Rock from Friday the 13th. Check it, the same irritating arc pattern, the same tepid outcome. It kind of baffles me how this weapon exists. What real purpose does it serve? Who is benefiting from this? Well, there's another benefit. The weapon has unlimited ammo. Unlimited ammo? Whoopee. Flare guns have 16 flares, which means you're going to spend only if you're just going to brainlessly shoot down the corridors of Dust Bowl like an idiot. So, we have another upside that's basically worthless. Fantastic. Keep going 0 for 0, Manmelter. You keep up that ratio, and I think you have a solid chance of being traded to the Cowboys. So what else we got? Surely this weapon has something interesting about it, right? Alt fire extinguishes teammates for stored crits? Oh golly, it's an early Christmas miracle! A reason to use this stupid thing! I'm so happy I can put a professional killstreak kill on this thing right now! So what exactly does that all entail? Like it says on the 10, you can right-click the mouse to let out a compressed bit of air that functions like a mini air blast. It can't reflect any projectiles, but it extinguishes teammates and stores critical hits, turning your normally 30 damage into a 90 damage flare. That requires no comboing like the flare gun. A 90 damage flare with full afterburn is not something you should be taking lightly, especially when you have to only just click the right mouse button to achieve it. On paper, this sounds fantastic for easy damage, but you have to refer to the previous point of the flares being damn near impossible to hit in the first place. What good is a 90 damage flare if you can't even hit anyone with it? And since this is a Dr. Gordbort weapon, it's got some major jank to it. In order to store crits, you have to extinguish teammates. This is not simply accomplished by pressing a button. Every flamethrower in the game, minus the flog, extinguishes a teammate or pushes back projectiles with a loud, distinct sound effect while the weapon twitches in your hands, which signifies that the weapon does indeed function and it does what it's supposed to do. The Manmelter's mini air blast insists on not doing that. The weapon stays stationary in your hands, and you instead have to hold the right mouse button instead of click it in order to do anything. There's a barely noticeable, easily missing suction sound that plays when you hold down the button, which is so easily suffocated by the heat of battle around you. Also, the suction effect has a visual cue that sometimes plays. Not always, sometimes. Imagine if your air blast occasionally had that distortion effect. How would that affect the nature of the mechanic? You wouldn't even know if it would work half the time. Trying to get your teammates in range is also a nightmare. You have to hold down right mouse button and just swing yourself all over in order to properly get in range of anything. And even then, most people won't have any idea what you're doing because no one uses the Manmelter and no one has any clue how it works. I would also like to mention this charred crumble artifact of a JPEG shows up anytime you extinguish someone, which blocks so much of your screen that it's almost a certainty it'll get you killed before you can even fire the weapon. and sometimes it likes to show up when you shoot the crit shot. I have never seen a weapon so inconsistent with its own rules. I seriously don't know if the effect was intentional and just hardly shows up when you shoot it because of source spaghetti or vice versa. So aiming your shots is nearly impossible. You can't see half the damn screen while using it, and its regular shots aren't even good for damage. And these are the upsides, ladies and gentlemen. What are the downsides? No random crits. Oh, Mary, Mother of Joseph, not the random... This is the only thing counted as a palpable downside in the description. Not the fact that the thing barely works, no random crits. The Pumpson can random crit. The Bison can random crit. But not this thing. Oh my god, what an absolute mess. This thing is washed. I hope I've given enough reasons why this thing is total junk on paper. But you gotta wait till it's in practice to see how terrible this thing is. It is even worse in gameplay. Every frustrating aspect of the weapon becomes a nail in its coffin during my gameplay. For over a month, in sessions recorded and not recorded, I have been playing Pyro straight with the Manmelter clip the entire time. Do you want to know how much fun I had? Do you really want to know? The only time I had fun, at all, is when I was instantly killing another player by a point-blank crit shot. 90 to the face, dead. That's it. Every other second I spent using this infernal device was teeth-grinding agony and pure misery. I can't even begin to describe how it felt like wading through sludge just to fire this over-polished horseshoe, and completely whiff my shot because of the flare bolt insisting on flying to Neptune instead of hitting a perfectly still sniper. The amount of times I've managed to extinguish a teammate who knew how the weapon worked and still missed the damn crit shot anyways was so astronomically high that if you built a stairway to heaven by adding a step every time I missed, you can make it all the way to the throne room of God and still have enough time to go to the Jack in Box. Hyperbole fails me. Words fail me. This is the most uncooperative secondary weapon I have ever seen in this game. Potentially in any game. You would think this would pair quite famously with the Flog due to its lack of an air blast, but no, it doesn't! The mini air blast doesn't provide any actual use or synergy. You are completely helpless against a skilled soldier or demoman player who can aim their shots. Instead of looking like a brainless moron for using the Flog, you just look like an idiot. It doesn't fare any better with the other flamethrowers. Every other one can air blast, which renders its sole function just worthless. The only primary weapon I could possibly recommend with this is the Dragon's Fury. It can still air blast, but it's a really gimped air blast that really cools down the weapon so you can't use it afterwards, which you can easily swap around with the Manmelter in a pinch. This is the only synergy that has with any of Pyro's arsenal, at all. Because of how sluggish it is, there's no potential to combo with anything. Playing Pyro is something I dread in my mind every single time I boot up the game because I think of how useless I am going to be the team because I'm using the Manmelter and not the flare gun! It seriously makes me wonder if all the bugs and inconsistencies and poor feedback were patched. Would this even be a good weapon? No! No, it wouldn't! Its upsides are still trivial in the grand scheme of TF2's game. Even if it worked as intended without the Cheeto JPEGs, it would still be the worst secondary weapon. Well, second worst, that is. Oh, no, I take that back. The gas passer has an upside. The gas passer can extinguish several people at once with actual proper auditory feedback. The gas passer does this one thing the Manmelter was designed to do somewhat, arguably, potentially better. What purpose does this thing serve then? I can't find it. In all my hours of gameplay for over a month, I couldn't find a single scenario where the dual use of a very middling flare gun and a less useful extinguishing tool came out objectively on top over anything else Pyro can offer. What is it with the Dr. Gortborg weapons that package so much jank and booty with them? Is it Way to Workshop's prank on Valve for not adding the Mule Molester? And you know what really stings? What really grinds my gears and got my blood to a boil over all of this? I don't even like Pyro! He is so much less fun to play than any other close quarters class. I'd rather play Spy or Heavy. I hate the gameplay loop of praying that Afterburn finishes my foes off after I get blown off the map. I hate praying that I could catch someone off guard for a chance to kill them because they shoot me once with a shotgun. And I hate trying to fight other pyros without a shotgun. I've wasted over a month of my life working on the script, the footage, the recording, and editing for a weapon I don't even like. Do you know what the Manmelter feels like? Do you really want to know? It's a 48-hour minimum wage job, part-time job every goddamn week. Does that sound suspiciously specific? Because it is. It's specific because that's me. That's my life. And using the Manmelter feels like a horrible job with bare minimum pay and no hope for anything to get better. Because your bosses cannot be asked to sign the magical paperwork that gives you any benefits you are legally entitled to. But you can't leave because you make so little money that a couple months of not working means you're dead. You're evicted and you're starving. I'm in a hell, and I'm gonna die in a hell like the rest of them because of the Manmelter. This weapon is a horrible, miserable chore of a job that only makes you sink worse and worse and wish for a rain that would wash all the scum off the streets. It just gives me some bad ideas in my head, you know? I'm the Manmelter.
Been playing TF2 my whole life. Maybe, decade now? That long, I still haven't learned, eh? I told Ma I wasn't gonna work for the man anymore, instead to get my money off the internet. Look where that's landed me. Nowhere. You can run on the place you want. Doesn't mean you're going anywhere. I ought to give up. What was I thinking? YouTube? A real career for a poor boy? This isn't a world for someone like me. Everyone here is a nobody wishing there was somebody. And I'm no different. It's all I've ever wanted, really. Maybe out of spite. Maybe out of love for content creation. Maybe I'll get lucky, strike gold, and start building a life for myself off the channel. And if I don't, then I don't see the point in trying no more.
Well, why does it matter? I think I've gone on and on about the grand picture of the pyro meta and all this existentialism, trying to compare and contrast how the Manmelter stacks up against everything else. Why does it matter? I wasn't able to see it because I was so blinded by the numbers and expected outcome and pure statistics, I couldn't see the forest for the trees. Sure, the weapon is hard to aim and doesn't have a great feedback loop, but what if you don't care about any of that? I've been approaching the problem purely analytically and haven't considered if someone simply doesn't care if it's a better option for them, wanted to use the weapon they thought looked cool, which I think is completely valid. Getting the critical hits is hard, aiming the bolts is hard, getting a kill is hard, but taking down an enemy player is still satisfying and fun regardless. During the last couple days I was gathering footage, I gradually learned to stop looking at the grass on the other side and just enjoy what I was capable of doing for the moment. It was difficult, filled with strife, but I was able to build up a fair few kills in the time. That brings me to the question about the whole video. Why did I even decide to make a video on a weapon I didn't like, on a class I don't like to play, and then even talk about for this long? Well, to be completely truthful, I felt a kind of connection with this thing. The spot I had envisioned for it amongst its peers was how I felt about myself for a long time. Drowned out in a crowd, not noticeable enough to make a name, never excelling at anything. There's a time and a place to just let go of all that. And if it's through suffering a mediocre weapon in a video game, then who's to say it isn't valid? The tier list, it doesn't matter. That clumsy metaphor about employability, whatever, scrap it. I feel like it still makes sense in a broad sense, but it still just overshadows any just raw fun you can have with the weapon, or any item scrutinized by that method of measurement into pure numbers, just is devoid of passion or care about it. If the Manmelter or any other weapon isn't deemed employable or useful, then the system just doesn't have to apply if you like having fun with it. You work outside the system? Good. I know that the Manmelter isn't ideal for a lot of scenarios, but if I wanted to use to extinguish people or as a gimped flare gun, who cares? Does those things. Servicely at best, but still does those things. Might not be the most rewarding feeling in the world, but even if the most mediocre, unimpressive weapon can achieve something a fantastic weapon can, then what's the shame in using it? The Manmelter isn't too good, but it really isn't that bad. And it's just okay when you get used to it. And that's okay with me. Use what you want to use, and use it how you see fit. If it isn't fun, why bother? This applies to basically every other weapon too. If you want to use the gas mask or however you'd like to use it, go nuts. The back burner for air blasting? Sure. There's a lot less than optimal ways to use the tools, but you can still use them. A recommendation not to use them is just that, a recommendation. It's not a strict rule. TF2 has been running since 2007. If you can't play the game how you see fit, then what's the point of even creating a Steam account? Maybe I am the Manmelter. Not very useful, I don't really excel at a whole lot of things, not very wieldy, but I'm me. I wouldn't have it any other way. Thank you, Ralph, for everything. Hood Knight, Street Dreams.
And it'll be a long time before you ever see me again, me again. They want me hold my head in shame, so I hold it more holding the head in vain. Comfort someone on the feds say I'm insane. My psych them no time, but no something. And David son told me put down the drink, dog. I got a lean sauce in the for the think, dog. I guess now I feel it up and head off. I need a little something to knock the edge off. Cause I found a song and life sucks. So I'm putting on some of my thugs. And I'm putting on the song for my dust. And if God need to guide us, and if you song couldn't guide us, I'm bumping on something inside us. So I'm another song for my riders, I'm with my riders, I'm on the ladder, and I don't like that, they don't like that, they don't like that, and I don't want that, and it'll be a long time before you ever see me again. Don't worry about me, worry about you, don't worry about some, worry what I do. Hey motherfuckers, it'll be a long time before you ever see me again, me again. And see, I need some time to meditate.